Good afternoon, Netroots activists, and welcome to the panel, The Aftermath of Dobbs, States Attorneys General, and the Fight to Protect Abortion Access. My name is James Toma, and I'm a Special Assistant Attorney General at the California Department of Justice. We're happy to have some of the leading progressive attorneys general in the country on today's panel, which will be moderated by Brittany Jenkins, the Policy Director at the Progressive State Leaders Committee. So access to abortion has been under grave threat since the U.S. Supreme Court Dobbs decision, which overturned Roe v. Wade. And in today's panel, we'll come to understand the special role that attorneys general have in protecting abortion access and defending reproductive health care. I'm privileged to introduce our four panelists, and I will start with New York Attorney General Tish James, who you can see on the screen here remotely. A.G. James is the 67th Attorney General for the state of New York and the first woman of color to hold statewide office in New York and the first woman to be elected New York Attorney General. Previously, A.G. James was the elected public advocate for the city of New York and the first woman of color to hold citywide office. As public advocate, she served as a watchdog over New York City government agencies and as an advocate for the city's most vulnerable communities. Her office passed numerous legislation, including groundbreaking law that banned questions about salary history in the employment process to address the gender wage gap. She successfully pushed New York City's largest pension fund to divest from gun and ammunition retailers and fought in court on behalf of children and families. Prior to that, A.G. James served on the New York City Council, where she passed the Safe Housing Act, forcing landlords to improve living conditions for tenants in New York City's worst buildings. She previously led the Brooklyn Regional Office of the New York State Attorney General's Office, where she investigated predatory lenders, assisted in the investigation of the NYPD's stop and frisk policy, and cracked down on firms engaged in deceptive business practices. She began her career as a public defender at the Legal Aid Society and is a graduate of Lehman College and Howard University School of Law. Let's welcome A.G. James, please.
Thank you so much for having me.
Next, we have Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison, sworn in as Minnesota's 30th Attorney General in 2019. A.G. Ellison is the first African American and the first Muslim American to be elected to statewide office in Minnesota. Before becoming A.G., A.G. Ellison represented Minnesota's 5th District in Congress, where he focused on consumer, worker, environmental, civil, and human rights protections for Minnesotans. As AG, he's championed affordable health care, a fair economy, and equal opportunity for all. A.G. Ellison opposed a new rule revoking legal status for immigrants who access public assistance, created a unit within the AG's office that focuses on investigating and prosecuting the abuse of workers and wage theft, as well as filing lawsuits against opioid manufacturers. Last year, A.G. Ellison and his team successfully prosecuted former police officer Derek Chauvin for the murder of George Floyd. Welcome, A.G. Ellison. Next to A.G. Ellison, we have Connecticut Attorney General William Tong. A.G. Tong is the 25th Attorney General and the first Asian American elected statewide in Connecticut. A.G. Tong's top priority is to protect Connecticut residents and consumers from powerful forces that threaten them. As Attorney General, he's taken on Purdue Pharmaceuticals, helped secure $6 billion for those affected by the opioid crisis. He's held ExxonMobil accountable for decades of lies regarding their role in climate change. He's a graduate of Phillips Academy Andover, Brown University, and the University of Chicago Law School. He practiced law for 18 years as a litigator in both state and federal courts, and then went on to serve 12 years in the Connecticut House of Representatives. A Connecticut native, A.G. Tong is the oldest of 5 children and grew up working with his immigrant parents in their family's Chinese restaurant. He and his wife, Elizabeth, live in Stamford, Connecticut with their 3 children and way too many pets, according to A.G. Tong. Yeah. Welcome, A.G. Tong. And next to A.G. Tong, we have California Attorney General Rob Bonta. In 2021, A.G. Bonta was sworn in as the 34th Attorney General of the state of California, the first person of Filipino descent and the second Asian American to occupy the position. A.G. Bonta's passion for justice and fairness was instilled in him by his parents, who served on the front lines of some of America's most important social justice movements. It is the reason why he became a lawyer, to help right historic wrongs and to fight for people who have been harmed. He worked his way through college and graduated with honors from Yale University and then later attended Yale Law School. A.G. Bonta has led statewide fights for racial, economic, and environmental justice and worked to further the rights of immigrant families, renters, and working Californians. He previously worked as Deputy City Attorney for the City and County of San Francisco, where he fought to protect Californians from exploitation and racial profiling. He went on to elected office in Alameda County, first as a council member and later as an assembly member representing parts of Oakland, Alameda, and San Leandro. There, he enacted nation-leading reforms to inject more justice and fairness into government and institutions. As the people's attorney, he seeks accountability from those who would abuse their power and harm others. And he is married to Mia Bonta. Together, they are proud parents of 3 children, Reina, Ileana, and Andres, as well as their dog, Legolas. Welcome, A.G. Bonta. As I said, we're very fortunate to have this talented and diverse group of attorneys general, and now I'd like to turn the panel discussion over to our moderator, Brittany Jenkins, who is the policy director at the Progressive States Leadership Committee and former chief of staff for Congressmember Rashid Tlaib. Brittany.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? All right. Well, I'm just going to start it with just a short read of announcements. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Just a few things to keep in mind. This session is being recorded and streamed. Please stay masked while indoors and not actively eating and drinking. Seats in the back of the room are set up with some extra room for those who would like some additional space. Please keep the aisles and any marked accessibility spaces open and clear for folks that need them. And with that, we're going to start the session by each Attorney General just having a few moments to speak about their work in this important space, abortion access. So we're going to kick it off with Attorney General Tish James, who's on the camera here.
Thank you so much, and it's great to see my colleagues in government, A.G. Tong, A.G. Bonta, and A.G. Ellison. It's great to see all of you. Sorry I could not be with you, but I decided to take a few days off, which unfortunately has not become a vacation. It's become days of events after events after events, but nonetheless, it's an honor and a privilege to be with all of you. And what we are seeing all throughout our country is an all-out assault on women's reproductive rights, to control our bodies, to determine our futures, to determine our destinies. And the reality is that the assault on the LGBTQ community, the assault on voting rights, and the assault on reproductive rights are all tied together. They're inextricably tied to one another. It's really all about control and maintaining power against those constituencies who oftentimes are marginalized and unrepresented. They're coming after our right to choose, and they're also coming out against our right to love, our right to organize, and our right to vote. These are basically 5 alarm fires. And we have to see the big picture. As long as one of us isn't free, then none of us is free. And as the Attorney General, I vow to represent the interest of individuals to act without fear or favor, and to hold the powerful accountable, and to be unbought and unbossed and unrelenting. And with that, I bring to the office of the New York State Attorney General some litigation skills, but also my ability to organize and a little bit of activism as well. And so in response to this recent Supreme Court decision, we convened a task force of legal pro bono organizations and law firms, which include some of the nation's top law firms and legal reproductive organizations. And this task force, we launched a hotline to provide legal guidance and resources to patients and to healthcare providers and supporters who are seeking information about their legal rights to access and to provide abortion. We will help doctors who might be prosecuted for providing medical care. We will help women and pregnant people who are scared and confused about their rights and are considering dangerous alternatives to medical care. We're reaching out to organizations that represent low-income women and women of color who obviously face the greatest threat with respect to the overturning of Roe versus Wade. In New York, we will keep abortion accessible and legal. And we will also provide assistance to anyone who comes to New York who needs to have an abortion. And it's important that we defend Planned Parenthood and recognize that Planned Parenthood needs our support and our resources. And also, most recently, we announced legislation to create a reproductive freedom and equity program, which includes providing funds to abortion providers and organizations all throughout the state of New York who face capacity issues at this time. We had a training session most recently that was provided by individuals in the reproductive space who obviously are concerned about the reversal of Roe versus Wade. I've reached out to a number of chambers of commerce to take a stand and a position with respect to reproductive care, because we know that capitalism cannot operate when democracy is being threatened. And it's really critically important that individuals understand that the majority of the workers in this country happen to be women. And given Roe versus Wade, it's really critically important that the business community stand up and take a position, and a strong position. And so those are just some of the items that we've been focusing on in the state of New York. Again, organizing individuals and boots on the ground, protecting vulnerable populations. It's really the core of everything that I do, standing up for the least of us, and standing and using the law both as a sword and as a shield. And I will continue to do that to make sure that abortion is free, accessible, and safe.
Thank you, Attorney General. We're just going to go down the line here. So, AG Bonta, would you like to go next?
Absolutely. And good afternoon, everyone. Rob Bonta, California Attorney General, and really honored and grateful for the opportunity to be here with my incredible colleagues doing important work all across the nation. And thank you to Netroots Nation and Progressive State Leaders Committee for bringing us together today to highlight the important work that attorneys general across this country have been doing and continue to do, especially in this space. And what attorneys general do generally is we protect your constitutional rights, your civil rights, your consumer rights. We protect your fundamental rights, your freedoms, your safety. And that fight, that work has never been more important than it is today. When you look out across the country, you see radical attorneys general doing the opposite, undermining safety, undermining fundamental rights, undermining freedom. While in Texas, we have an attorney general who is working with district attorneys to prosecute an abortion ban. In California, we issued a first of its kind legal alert indicating that California law should not be misused to prosecute pregnancy loss. In Indiana, we have an AG who went after a doctor for providing reproductive health care, an abortion, to a 10-year-old victim of rape. And as that happened in California, we were working with local law enforcement and law enforcement partners to make sure our clinics, where providers provide reproductive health care and patients receive it, are safe and accessible. And in Idaho, we have an attorney general who's defending a near total ban on abortions. And meanwhile, this group here, along with other Democratic AGs, have challenged that law to strike it down for being illegal. So that the contrast couldn't be sharper. The choice couldn't be clearer. You have attorneys general who will protect your rights, your freedoms, your safety, and you have those who will undermine it and strip those rights and those protections away. And that's why it's so important, the work that we do in this space. We've been taking on Trump-era rules to roll them back when they reduced access to reproductive health care. We've been challenging, going to the fight wherever it is, challenging bans that we believe are unconstitutional in the Supreme Court, in other courts, all across the nation, wherever and whenever it occurs. In California, been working with our legislative colleagues as a former legislator to enhance protections, including a new law moving towards the governor's desk that requires law enforcement not to assist and cooperate with outside law enforcement agencies when they seek to prosecute providers or patients for receiving an abortion or giving an abortion in California where it is fully legal. We're also providing consumer alerts to make sure that patients and Californians know about crisis pregnancy centers and the fact that they do not provide the full range of reproductive health care, including they do not provide abortions. We're working with our tech platforms and healthcare providers to make sure they are adhering to the strong laws that protect the confidentiality and the privacy of the patients that they work with. So there's a lot of important work to do, and Republican AGs, I believe, have failed to defend and protect reproductive freedom. But the AGs here and Democratic AGs across the nation, we have not. And we will use the full force of the law, the full authority of our offices to make sure that we protect and defend and support reproductive freedom to the fullest extent. So this is a dark moment. There's no doubt about it. The prior administration had many dark moments, if it wasn't one complete dark moment. And the attorneys general, the Democratic attorneys general, stepped up and got into that fight and got into that fray and fought for you. And we're going to continue to do that here. We're going to continue to be a bright light in this dark moment. And in California specifically, reproductive freedom will always be protected. And we want to work with our partners across the nation to ensure that that right extends to all Americans. Thank you very much.
Thanks, AG Bonta. I'm William Tong. I'm the Attorney General of Connecticut. And let me just start by saying how grateful I am for my colleagues, for Rob Bonta and Keith Ellison and Tish James and Maura Healy and Dana Nessel and Aaron Ford and all of us across the country in this moment. I must say, as a son of immigrants, growing up in my parents' Chinese restaurant, I could have never imagined that I would sit here today, but be here with such a diverse group of attorneys general who really reflect who we are as Americans. And I think we should really be proud of this group and how hard we work together. And we do have a lot of work to do. Yeah, we do. As A.G. Bonta said, this is an extraordinarily serious and dangerous moment. At the end of the Supreme Court's term, we saw an unprecedented attack on fundamental rights and our way of life as Americans. In a few short days, at the end of June, the Supreme Court carpet bombed basic liberties that we have assumed, and in some cases, I fear, took for granted, because they've always been there for us. I was born in 1973. I was born a month before Roe was decided. So I've only ever lived in a world, and my sisters and my wife have only lived in a world, and my daughters, in which abortion in Connecticut was safe, legal, and accessible. And I'll be honest, I didn't think until it happened that would change. I had hoped and continued to hope that would always be the case, and then it wasn't in an instant. And we were in all of those cases. The West Virginia case that did so much damage to the EPA, the Bruin case that General James defended so strongly, but that attacked New York's gun laws, and by the transitive property attacks all of our gun laws. And then, of course, Dobbs. And so one of the questions that we were asked to think about is, well, what, since Dobbs was decided, what have you done, and what has been, the most important heart of what you're doing to defend reproductive freedom? And candidly, in this really confusing and disorienting time, it has been really important for me as Attorney General to be clear, to say over and over again in Connecticut that in Connecticut abortion is legal, period, full stop. Safe, legal, accessible. And that we, as a state, have an obligation to enforce that law and protect and defend people, whether they live in Connecticut or they come from other places into Connecticut. And one of the things that I think it's really been important for me to push back on is, number one, the confusion that people feel, even if they live in Connecticut and they know intellectually that abortion is legal. But what does that really mean, right? If I am a young woman or patient and I have to make a decision, right? What environment am I making that decision in? I get that people say it's legal in Connecticut, but do I still have some risk because of Texas, because of SB 8, because of what I read on the internet and hear from other people? So it's really important for us to be clear and to be there for people and issue guidance and provide resources. We launched a hotline, 1-888, I think, CT Choice, so that people can call and access resources at the state level. The other thing that's been important is to make sure that people understand the gravity of this moment. And so we have a gubernatorial election going on, and we have the Democratic incumbent governor who's very pro-choice and dedicated to defending reproductive freedom and patients and women and doctors and healthcare providers. But we have a Republican nominee that says, I'm pro-choice too, and don't worry about it because Connecticut is fine. Don't believe it, right? He says Connecticut's fine because we codified Roe versus Wade and you don't have to worry about it. We are not fine. Nobody is fine in this country, as General James said, as long as somebody in Connecticut or in any other state is denied the right to make basic choices about their own bodies and health care and reproductive freedom. Nobody is safe if there's confusion in Connecticut as to whether and how you can access reproductive health care. Nobody is safe if other states are passing statutes to attack people in Connecticut, or if our family members and friends in other states don't have the same rights that we do. Nobody is safe because in an instant, my wife and my sisters and my mom and my daughters became less free and less safe on a terrible day in June. And so it's really important that we all recognize, particularly in blue states, that we're not fine and we're not safe, and that the fall of Roe was not the end of the discussion. The fall of Roe was just the beginning. And what you're seeing now, Kansas was good for a moment, but then the next day, look at what happened in Indiana, what's happening in South Carolina. When they're done in those states, they will come for us, right? You're a former state legislator. You know that every year, even though these bills don't pass, there are bills that sound appealing to voters. Parental notification, right? Late-term abortion bans, things that sound appealing, and if you don't understand them or don't dig into them and understand what they really drive at, they can deceive people into thinking that that's good policy. And so, despite the fact that we've codified Roe, there are attacks every year on the right to choose in Connecticut, and they will keep coming and they will intensify. And so that's why the message I want to leave with all of you is it's time to stand up and fight everywhere, including blue states, purple states, everywhere. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, let me just say I agree with everything that Tish, Rob, and William have said. Let me start out by saying that it is important to note Dobbs was wrongly decided. I just want to just put that in the ground. The Supreme Court says, well, if it's not explicitly written in there, then it's only a right if it's deeply rooted. I'd say 50 years is deeply rooted. So they just decided arbitrarily. Don't be confused. This is not legal analysis. This is straight politics. And the Supreme Court has always been that way, and make no mistake about it, Dobbs was wrongly decided. It was decided a certain way because they have a vision of a certain kind of America. And if you want to see that vision, just watch A Handmaid's Tale. I think that it is important to look at the trend, and I think all of us agree, starting with Bush v. Gore. In the year 2000, they just made a completely arbitrary decision to stop the vote count and hand the election to a particular candidate. Then we can just fast forward up to 2013, when the Shelby County decision was made. Oh, let's not forget about the Citizens United decision. Let's not forget about Epic Systems, where they said that workers really can't come together. They're going to be locked into these stupid arbitration contracts, clauses. We have been on at least a 22-year run of an anti-majoritarian institution known as the Supreme Court imposing its will. And I think this is a question for us to contemplate here at Netroots. These folks have figured out if we have, since we represent a distinct minority, and I'm talking about the philosophical folks who have been pushing us toward Dobbs, if we're going to be in a minority, how then do we rule the country? And, divide. Got to divide now. This division between men and women, people who were born here, people who weren't, racial division. It seems like the rantings of a crazy president, right? But there's a method to the madness, because they're picking your pocket while they're creating all the distraction. But then, so it's important to understand that the trajectory you're on and the role the Supreme Court has consistently played, other than the Warren Court. Think about the Plessy-Lochner era. Anybody who, y'all know Plessy, right? Separate but equal. Think about that court and the parallels to this one. Kansas is important to note because it shows that even in red states, people don't like this. They don't care. Very important to keep that in mind. Minnesota is a bit of an island. We have a colleague named Kwame Raoul. He's the AG in Illinois. In the Midwest, we're pretty much the whole game. We have some colleagues who we adore, who we think are wonderful. Josh Call, Dana Nessel. Problem is that they have laws that were established before they ever got to be AG, which essentially have wiped out the right to a safe legal abortion in Michigan and in Wisconsin. Iowa, North Dakota, South Dakota, we are seeing influx from Texas, Missouri, all over the country in Minnesota. So what have we done? We've made it clear that people understand that they have a right to an abortion in Minnesota and also in Illinois. We've also made it clear to them that if you get an abortion in Minnesota, you have a right to travel, and you have a right to do what is legal to do in Minnesota. And if somebody tries to punish you for doing what is legal to do in Minnesota, we will go into those courts and defend you. And that includes extradition. This includes the whole range of rights. People have a right to travel. They have a right to do what is legal to do in our states. It is important that we understand that we are not done. I think William's absolutely right. We are in the middle of something, and what we really need is a massive upsurge of people who believe in basic human rights and freedoms for all. We have to be full-throated about our embrace of multiracial democracy, not let them divide us. And we have to understand that this is not the moment to hope for the best and think that they got enough already. They have not got enough already. And it's very clear that they do not, that anytime, these guys, they say they believe in precedent. Notice, Comey Barrett, Gorsuch, and Kavanaugh said that they would respect the precedent. And all of them have violated what they said in their confirmation hearing. So at this point, I'll wrap up by saying Attorney General races are very important. I hope this is a lesson that we all really embrace. In years gone by, maybe AG races were sleepy affairs. Not now. Whether it's your wallet or your family pocketbook or your right to not be the victim of a scam or your basic civil and human rights or your right to cast a vote in a fair election or your right not to have the post office throttle the mails and deprive you of your right to vote by mail, your AG's on the front line of that fight. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. And I'm going to start with some questions, and there's going to be some time at the end so that we can take some questions from the audience. The first question I have for each AG on this panel is, we know that attorneys general have widely varied powers in different states across the country. Can each of you explain a bit about the power of your office as it relates to protecting abortion access in your state?
So let me begin, since I'm not there in person. I have the ability to convene organizations not only in New York, but throughout. We also obviously have the power to litigate, to defend the state, but we also have the ability to bring affirmative action cases, affirmative litigation cases, and we've done that in a wide range of issues. And with respect to the reproductive rights space, working with other attorney generals, what we do is file briefs. Most recently, Attorney General Bonta and I have filed briefs against those states that have passed basically near bans on abortions. We've also joined together with a number of attorney generals, with all of the attorney generals on this panel and others, to file briefs in cases where they have instituted 6-week bans, 12-week bans, bans in the case of situations where there was a fetal defect and individuals sought to seek abortions. We have been standing up and joining with our federal partners with respect to expanding access to reproductive rights and medical abortion as well. I have been working with social media companies about the misinformation and the disinformation that is online with respect to abortion providers, including but not limited those to the crisis pregnancy prevention centers that AG Bonta mentioned, that in fact do not provide reproductive services. We have joined a national coalition of over 22 attorney generals in issuing a statement reaffirming our commitment to supporting and expanding access to abortion care, and again, pressing the federal government to do more, and they can do more, particularly in providing access to medical abortions, and also just messaging. It's really critically important that all of us message and get our talking points, making sure that they're consistent, and that there is a clearinghouse within the United States Department of Justice to let us know what is happening all across the nation so that we can connect dots. This is not a policy discussion at this point, my friends, not a policy discussion. This is a point in our country where we are facing an existential threat to our democracy. And it's really critically important that we use the power that's in our hand, and that is the power to vote. But we can only do that by bringing in vulnerable, marginalized, and people who've been left behind and ignored for far too long, and recognize the power of the vote, and that it's really critically important that we vote for down ballot elections, including but not limited to the bench of attorney general, Democratic attorney generals, and expanding that bench. That is so important. That's why I need all of you to support Keith Ellison and Dana Nessel and Josh Cowell and Aaron Ford. Those are vulnerable, incumbent Democratic attorney generals. A.G. Tong, everybody loves him in Connecticut. A.G. Bonta, everybody loves him in California. New York, I'm okay. But I need everyone to come out and vote and maintain our bench and expand it, particularly in Georgia. We need to pick one up in Georgia. Again, this is the time for voting and voting and voting and recognizing that we're in the midst of a 5-alarm fire.
Let me just say that it is true that we all have slightly different powers from state to state to state. But it's also true that every single state plus the territories do have attorneys general. And so there's an attorney general for you to work with no matter where you are. I would say to everybody listening, build a relationship with your attorney general. I used to be in Congress, and I know that folks kind of think, oh, well, the action is in Washington. Sometimes, but more and more, you're going to see it in our states. We've all got to develop a stronger state sensibility, but that doesn't mean we can't act nationally because we're in the states. We're acting nationally right now. right? So we coordinate on briefs a lot. But the real thing is that you and I and all of us on this panel co-govern by being in relationship with each other. As it relates to what we can do in Minnesota, we do a lot of criminal prosecution, but we are the prosecutor of last resort, meaning that the counties have first shot at what cases are going to be prosecuted. I'm actually not the boss of the county attorney. They are individually elected on their own, so I have to work in partnership with them. We have a lot of civil jurisdiction, and we represent all the state agencies. So we have a lot of authority in Minnesota, but we don't have all the authority. In some states like Delaware and in New Jersey, the Attorney General operates pretty much the same as the U.S. Attorney General, right? They are the top criminal authority and civil. Not in every state, though. So it kind of varies from place to place. The main thing is, and today we're talking about the right to choose, but bear in mind the words of Clarence Thomas in the concurrence. He said, well, the right to privacy, all that stuff. What about the right to marry who you want to marry? What about the right to contraception? These people are ready to strike down like the grid, your right to contraception. Imagine the cops who are going to be knocking on folks' doors to find out whether they have birth control pills. This is an assault on everyone's freedom. Make no mistake about it. He did not mention interracial marriage. Funny. But don't doubt for a moment that some state, look, up until 1968, 16 states said it was illegal for a black person and for a white person to marry anybody unless they were white. They let us little brown folks marry whoever we wanted. But they didn't want to mess with the purity of the Aryan race, I guess. So, the bottom line is we are in a moment where we got to use our power, but we want to use it in connection with you. And I'll just stop by saying this about AG authority. Martin Luther King never held any elective office. You don't have to be in office to wield power, but you do need to be working in conjunction with people who can benefit from your organizing, your research, your study, and your creative ideas. And that's why this panel is important, because it puts us together in the same room, get our heads together.
So in Connecticut, abortion rights are civil rights, and as it should be across the country. And so one of the things that we're focused on is marshaling all of our civil rights authority and our civil rights unit in the Office of the Attorney General to defend abortion rights and health care, and the right to choose and the right to safe, legal, and accessible abortions. And so we're working with the governor. We put together this hotline. We're adding more civil rights resources to our civil rights unit to staff up for the oncoming fights, and using all of our authority, not just our civil rights authority, which we actually just acquired recently, and I know many of my colleagues have civil rights units in their states. Tish has a very powerful civil rights unit in operation in New York. And so we're using that authority plus our consumer protection authority to protect residents in Connecticut. On top of that, I want to briefly touch on two really important pieces of legislation. So as AGs, we have our actual enforcement authority, and then we have a policy role. And though we're no longer legislators and frontline lawmakers, there's something called the bully pulpit, and people, for some reason, care what we think on certain issues. And so it's important for us to use that platform to speak. And so on a policy level, we help to craft and pass a law in Connecticut to fight these so-called crisis pregnancy centers that you've heard talked about today. Does everybody here in this room know about crisis pregnancy centers? Right? Unfortunately, right? These fake organizations where people wear lab coats and look like doctors and nurses and they set up shop in Connecticut next to Planned Parenthood or places where you can seek health care and abortion, and they deceive you into coming in and sometimes in languages other than English, right? And so it seems like a hospitable place. And then when you go in, you think you're talking to a doctor or nurse, and in fact, you're talking to an activist who's trying to talk you out of getting an abortion and to compromise your ability to make sound healthcare decisions, and in some cases, imperil your health. And if you're pregnant, imperil your health going forward. And so we now have, having passed that law, we have the authority to bring an enforcement action under our Consumer Protection Authority and under this statute to stop, the technical word is, enjoin a crisis pregnancy center from lying to you and to seek penalties and attorney's fees. That's number one. That's a concrete action. There's a lawsuit actually challenging this law and my authority to do that, so we're engaged in that litigation. And then on top of that, you may have heard that Connecticut was the first state in the country to pass a law to protect women, patients, doctors in light of what we're seeing with Dobbs. And what this law, it basically focuses on protecting women and patients and doctors and healthcare providers, especially against interstate interference. And in the wake of SB 8, we found it was important to say that the governor and the attorney general, I signed the extradition paperwork. We're not going to extradite people for doing something in Connecticut that isn't illegal in Connecticut, okay? However, it's really important for me to make sure that everybody understands this is not a safe harbor, okay? And it is going to be tough to hold this line because it doesn't give you the ability to commit a crime in another state that is a crime in that state and then run to Connecticut and seek protection. Now, that doesn't mean we won't do everything to help and defend you if all you did was seek health care, right, and get an abortion. But what we did as much as we could do, and that is protect people when they've done something in Connecticut that isn't a crime in Connecticut. On top of that, the law prohibits state employees, government employees, from assisting people from other states, like serving process, legal process, like filing suit, serving papers, processing in court, actions to attack people in Connecticut from out of state. And we also stopped and set up barriers so that people coming from out of state who try to get information about people's healthcare decisions are stopped from getting that information. Finally, I'll add that two additional important things that it does is it expands the ability of advanced practice registered nurses, nurse midwives, and physician's assistants to perform medication and aspiration abortions. That was an important clarification. And then also it creates, I think at the first of its kind, a cause of action. So if you're a doctor or nurse in Connecticut and somebody from Texas comes in and tries to sue you or sues you in Texas and somehow holds you liable for doing something that's not illegal in Connecticut, and that is assisting somebody in getting health care and getting an abortion, we now create a cause of action so you can countersue them, okay, for attacking you as an additional protection and check on other states invading, frankly, the sovereignty of the state of Connecticut.
The powers that attorneys general have are wide and they're varied, and they are not always, the full range of them are not always intuitive to the average observer. And some of them have been touched on. I want to maybe go place a point of emphasis on some of them and provide a little more detail as it relates in California. The type of power that AGs have that most people think of is our direct legal power. Prosecuting someone who endangers the safety or security of a clinic, filing an amicus brief, going to court, overturning Trump-era rules that rolled back reproductive freedom, providing comment letters on proposed rules of the Biden administration that enhance and strengthen reproductive freedom throughout the nation. Those are all our direct legal roles. But we also have convening power, advising power, and oversight power, which I want to talk about a little bit more. When it comes to convening power, we can pull groups together. And by the way, all these powers, we need to use every single one of them to the fullest extent in this fight right now. It's all hands on deck. Use every tool you have, pull every lever that you have to fight and push back and fight for our values. Convening power is pulling people together to work, to collaborate, to partner. It could be pulling the private bar together to provide representation when individuals are civilly sued or criminally prosecuted. It could be working with our U.S. attorneys in the state of California, as we have, to make sure our clinics are safe and secure, working with our healthcare providers, our law enforcement community, to make sure that they're reminded of the laws that they need to enforce at this time when there's greater threats to providers and to patients. Not always articulated, but a really important role. You won't see it in the Constitution or in any statute, but it's an important role that we have as attorneys general. We also have advising power of chief law officers. We can restate, clarify, reaffirm what the law is. To General Tong's point, reminding people that in California, abortion is legal, accessible, and safe, period, full stop. Whatever the noise is, whatever else you're hearing, whatever else you're reading, it's important to state what the law is. People are not sure. They need their chief law officer to tell them. We provide consumer alerts, telling people, again, what crisis pregnancy centers are, telling district attorneys, public defenders, and police that our homicide statute shall not be used to prosecute pregnancy loss. It was being used to prosecute pregnancy loss, wrongly. And we got involved in an amicus brief with one DA in the Central Valley, and then we clarified for the rest of the state what the rule is and what the rule isn't. So that advising power is really important. And then we have oversight power as well, particularly in California. It's unique to us as the healthcare industry continues to see more consolidation, more mergers. When nonprofit hospitals merge and consolidate, we have a role of reviewing the terms and conditions and providing approval. And one of the things we always look for is to make sure that reproductive health care remains robust and that isn't lost when there's a merger or a consolidation. So from direct legal power to convening power to advising power to oversight power, there's a lot of powers that we have. And we're doing our best to use all of them in California. And I know my fellow colleagues are as well.
My next question is for A.J. James. So we already know that both the legal and practical restriction on abortion disproportionately impact communities of color and low-income communities. Are there steps your office is taking to help protect access for these communities? And what additional things that the government individuals can do to help in this space?
Thank you for that question. I just want to give a little primer on the 14th Amendment real quick. And I think it's important that individuals understand that the 14th Amendment was basically enacted to protect the rights of Black people. And that 14th Amendment was extended to protect the right to marry, protect the right for reproductive care, protected a wide range of issues. And as was mentioned, Justice Clarence Thomas says that he's not finished. It's not over yet. Oberfeld is being challenged, maybe challenged. Griswold may be challenged. Loving versus Virginia may be challenged, and we all know what happened to Roe versus Wade. And this is going to have a major impact on low-income women, and particularly women of color who did not have access to transportation and or the resources to have an abortion. And so what we are doing is working with advocacy groups all across this nation, but first organizing the state of New York and joining partners in those states, particularly those states that have complete and total bans, have restrictive laws with respect to access to abortion, and have Republican attorney generals who've never reached out to these marginalized groups. In fact, they have no idea in most cases what an attorney general does, who the attorney general is, what their role is, and what their responsibility is. And so what we are doing is organizing with those organizations on the ground in some of those states, bringing them into the fold, and extending and expanding our arm of justice and our ability to protect marginalized populations. And lastly, working with social medias social media companies and e-commerce platforms is so critically important. I convened a few of them last week, asked them a series of questions with regards to privacy, tracking of information, misinformation, disinformation, what they are doing with respect to storing a lot of the information, and where do they stand with respect to reproductive health care. They had to respond to a letter from our Republican colleagues who basically said, listen, the First Amendment basically you should use the First Amendment to protect the rights of crisis pregnancy centers and others who are quote unquote pro-life. But let me just say, put a comma there. Individuals who are pro-life are against child care, against prenatal care, against resources for individuals who seek to have children in our country. So to describe them as being pro-life is a misnomer. But that being said, just reaching out to organizations on the ground, spreading the word, providing free transportation, free childcare, and free expenses to those individuals who want to come to New York State to have a safe abortion. That's what we are doing in New York. Abortion, we are a safe haven here in the state of New York. We will continue to be a safe haven. And as long as I am the Attorney General of the great state of New York, we will extend our hand to individuals, particularly low-income individuals and women of color who unfortunately do not have an ally and or a friend in the office of the Attorney General in their respective state.
Thank you. And my next question is for AG Bonta. What are some other aspects of abortion access that people may not immediately think of as barriers? And how is your office working to make sure that those don't become roadblocks?
A lot of people have said that you're in California. Abortion is safe, legal, and accessible. There's nothing else that you need to do. And that is absolutely wrong. It's the opposite. It's time to lean in, to push, to get further into this fight, and to address all the different ways that access to reproductive health care and abortion can be limited or scaled back or reduced. Simple things, but important things like having access to a clinic where you would seek reproductive health care or an abortion, and doing that free of intimidation, coercion, or violence, working with our local law enforcement. Threats are up. We're hearing from Planned Parenthood and others at clinics, and making sure that we provide enough security and support so that those who seek to access the clinics can do so. Making sure that the internet and our information systems don't have disinformation, and that we make clear where you can get reproductive health care and where those might try to suggest that they're providing reproductive health care, but are not, including our crisis pregnancy centers. We're reminding those who have a duty that they may not be focused on that they need to fulfill that duty, including the duty in our jails and our prisons to provide reproductive health care to those individuals who have no choice unless it's being provided in those facilities by those who run them. We're making sure that those who have sensitive data about pregnancy on apps that women and other pregnant people use as they decide to start a family, that is protected, it's confidential, it's private, it's not disclosed. So there are quite a few places and ways where we're getting involved, and then again that unique role that we have when we oversee the mergers and consolidations of healthcare providers, making sure that in that process we don't lose reproductive healthcare services. So it's not just the right to an abortion. There are so many aspects and components and dimensions where we have to be vigilant and communicating, getting active, enforcing right now. So now it's more important than ever that we stay active and aggressive.
My next question is for A.G. Ellison. We've been seeing a lot on on social media, warnings about donating to abortion access funds. As a resident in a safe state, could be put at risk of prosecution at another state. Is this a real concern?
Well, let me say this about law. You know what it is when you start litigating, right? I'll put it like this. If you donate to an abortion fund from a state that may prohibit it, and that abortion is performed in a state where it's legal, I would argue that this is a perfectly legal thing for you to do. I would defend your right to do it. I will put the resources of my office into defending your right to donate to whoever you please. But I can't guarantee you that, Ken Paxton's not going to try to sue you, or prosecute you. And so that's the territory that we're in now. We don't have any, no lawyer who studied this is going to tell you that nobody's going to serve you with something if you exercise your First Amendment right to support other people's right to get an abortion in a place where it's legal to do so. So that is how I would answer that question. I think it is legal and lawful, and I think that you should do it. Not that I'm giving you legal advice from this stage, but what I will say is that you should do it knowing that you've consulted somebody, you've consulted the laws of your state and the state where the abortion will be performed, and walk into it knowing about it. And if you have a very specific case, talk about it and just sort of flesh it out. We are not in an environment where you can take action and just completely ignore the implications. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't do what you believe is right. It believes you should do what is right, knowing that there will be people who are going to try to oppose you. That's what courage is called, when you do what's right, even though you know that somebody else might not like it. So.
And my next question is for AG James and AG Ellison. Now, folks in this room or watching online are either directly impacted by this rollback of abortion rights or have friends and family members who are. Do you have any advice for the best ways folks can help in this fight?
You want to kick it off, Tish? Or?
No, go ahead. You
Right.
got the mic. Go ahead.
Right. So let me tell you, here's the first thing to do to help make sure that people can have their right to a safe legal abortion is educate yourself. Understand what's going on. I don't know if you have to read every single word of Dobbs, but it wouldn't hurt if you read it or at least got well into it so you understand what it is. And then what you want to do is connect with people who are already in the movement if you're not involved. There are people in almost every single state, even the ruby reddest of the reddest state, who are working on a woman's right to choose. And so connect with them. Don't just do it on your own. So study, connect with people who are working on it. There might be folks who you could maybe be a doula. You could be an activist. You can help raise money for people. There will be people from some states where the right to abortion is not legal and may have to expend a lot of money to go somewhere where it is legal. These folks may have to stay somewhere overnight, so raising resources is important. I would also say that it's important to understand the other rights that have been jeopardized and put into question with the Dobbs decision. And we've all mentioned the Thomas concurrence. Start working on that stuff now. I think also, look, they've said it's a state matter. In light of Kansas, can we win a statewide guarantee to an abortion in a red state? Don't say it can't happen. You don't know that. Let's see what we can do. Let's research it and see if we can get. If Kansas just did what they did, what about doing something the other way? I remember 2012, the far right wanted to pass a ballot measure in Minnesota that said that marriage can be only between one man and only between one woman. And the very next year, after we defeated it at the polls, we passed a law that said, you know what? Who you marry is your business, not the government's. What if we put some stuff up and see where it went? There have been a lot of measures in red states where things have passed that you didn't think were going to pass, like the increase in the minimum wage, like the person legislation in Mississippi. There have been ballot measures where we have won. That might be some things that we work on as well. But here's the thing. Our only limitation is our imagination and our ability to work hard. So let's get at it.
So, I've heard time and time again as I traveled across this country that there's a lot of apathy amongst Democrats, that individuals are not motivated to come out and vote, that there's a lot of excitement on the other side, that there is a red wave, and that we will be trounced in November. And that the other side are basically single voter issues. They vote on the single issue voters. And so our right to choose, our right to fight for, the right to love whoever we want to love, our right to organize labor, and our right to vote, all of that should motivate individuals to get out and vote. It's also important to understand that the attack against reproductive care and the right to an abortion is really a public health crisis because it jeopardizes the lives of women. It endangers people's lives. It's as simple as that. And so many women have died as a result of pregnancy. So many people have gone into dark places to have abortions. So many people, unfortunately, have lost jobs because they've become pregnant. So many people. And it's critically and incumbent upon all of us, and particularly young people, to get out there and to organize like never before and to let people know what is at stake: our fundamental values, our democracy, and women as a whole, our right to autonomy, to control our own bodies. And having an abortion is really, as far as I am concerned, as well as others on this panel, really constitute, emergency care. And what is happening when individuals present themselves at hospitals and at other medical facilities all throughout our country, particularly in red states, they're not given that emergency care, which by federal law includes the right to an abortion. This is the time for all of us to act. This is not the time for all of us to sit back and to analyze. This is the time that all of us must lean in, boots on the ground, and organize like never before. No more philosophical debates. It's time for action. And it's time to vote for people who believe in choice, who believe in the right to marry, who believe in labor, and who believe in the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which must be passed now, and an end to gerrymandering.
And my last question, so we'll have some time for questions from the audience, is going to be about the concurrence that we had in the SCOTUS opinion. I'll open this up to anybody on the panel who wants to speak on it. There's at least one member, of course, of the Supreme Court who does not believe in the law of the long-recognized 14th Amendment right to privacy as AGL.
Clarence Thomas.
Now, what implications does that have? And are there any steps your office is taking right now to protect other rights that may be under threat in the future?
Yes, Clarence Thomas. Thank you, General James. Let me just echo again what General Ellison said. The reason why this is such a dangerous time and why people are at so much risk is that there are very few guarantees. I'm pretty confident, very confident, that if you're a woman or patient in Connecticut and you need an abortion, you can get one, and you will have access to a safe abortion. But beyond that, there are very few guarantees now, and that's why it's such a difficult and dangerous time. Let me nerd out for a second because you asked a legal question, and I had a special opportunity to learn constitutional law at the University of Chicago Law School from Professor Barack Obama. And in that class, I learned that the right to privacy is embedded in the 14th Amendment, as General James said, in the guarantee of due process and equal protection, and in the penumbra, that's a big word, the penumbra of the First Amendment. And we, as lawyers and students, and all of you didn't have to go to law school, you learned this at some point in some way in U.S. history or civics, and that has always been true. And what the Supreme Court did in a few short days was blow all of that up. And that's why when Clarence Thomas says that the door is now open to revisit facts, legal facts that we have always known to be true, that are based on the right to privacy, the fact that I am able to marry my wife, who is a white woman, without anybody questioning or taking legal action against us and our 3 children and our family, right? The right in Connecticut and across the country to marry who you love if they are of the same sex. It is legal, and it ought to be safe and legal and accessible, right? Sound familiar? And the right to contraception, and so many other choices that people ought to be able to make for themselves. So much of that is in question because they have blown a huge hole in that legal foundation. And I just want to close by saying that they build this all on this structure of originalism, right? That they think that we ought to interpret the Constitution the way it would have been interpreted at the founding, and that there has to be a historical analog, whatever that means, to anything that we do today, anything that a state legislature would do today. And I just want to note that there's a real callousness to originalism, because in order to get there, for example, on gun violence in the Bruin case, in order to buy what Clarence Thomas is selling, you have to ignore the fact that by impairing or getting rid of a state law to protect us from gun violence, by overturning it, you will make people less safe. Because at the founding, there weren't AR-15s, there weren't high-capacity magazines, and there weren't mass shootings in public schools, including at Sandy Hook Elementary. Right? That didn't exist. It's the callousness, the recklessness, the callousness of Dobbs. Yeah. They didn't think about that young woman in Ohio, right? Or the doctor in Indiana, and they don't care. Right? The callousness of West Virginia and what it will do to the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act. And so that's what we have to push back on. There's this dark, you use the word dark, but this dark and insidious movement, legal movement, that is founded on this, what I guess they call a principle of originalism, but it's not any principle at all. It's an utterly callous approach to wrecking people's lives. That's what we're up against. And finally, they may try, and they will try, if they get control of one or both houses of Congress, to pass a nationwide ban on abortion. The first thing I will note is, on what basis? Right? What power do they have in Congress to ban abortion? They don't, number one. But if they try, the 4 of us and our colleagues will be the first to sue.
So Justice Thomas said the quiet part out loud. Yeah. And what he said was painful and dangerous and tragic and, I believe, wrongly analyzed, but he said it. And so if there is any silver lining to that, it's that there is advance notice and that there's an opportunity to know what might come or what will come and to act. And in California, right now, the legislature has put on the ballot a proposition to strengthen and enshrine privacy rights that are being chipped away at, stripped away. And putting them in our state constitution, the right to reproductive health care, the right to an abortion, the right to contraception. That must be done in more states. And we have a proposition, Proposition 8, which bans same-sex marriage and made marriage between one man and one woman. It's unenforceable because it was struck down by courts. but it could reemerge and reappear if those court decisions are changed or are reversed. And so we know that, and we have a chance to act. And, you know, people say elections have consequences. They do. Consequences also have elections. So when you have a court that was handpicked, packed for people with a certain ideological perspective, and they've made decisions that for the first time in the history of our nation stripped away rights instead of clarifying them, affirming them, giving them to the people, there's an opportunity to voice our views of that. We have a minority that is imposing dictates on the majority of this country. The majority of our country believe in Roe versus Wade, believe in choice, believe in common sense gun laws. And they, with their minority view, are stripping all that away. So we can't let the minority dictate for the majority. And the power is in us. The right to vote, it rests with the people. It's not the I, it's you and me and we and us. We can exercise our right to vote. We can have other leaders with different outcomes and different consequences. So, and we have an election coming up that can allow us to do that. And so, General James talked about apathy. That is the biggest enemy to democracy. It's not a certain person or a certain party, although there are certain people in certain parties that are threats. It's when we don't act. But when we rise up, when we act, we are not here for the ride. We are not passive observers that have to just watch what's going to happen. We are shapers of it. We are agents. We are change makers. And so we have to exercise that right to vote, exercise what the majority, voice what the majority of the people of this nation want, and make sure we see the change that we want to see in the next election cycle.
Can I make one? Let me just make one pitch in terms of this. Put this in the box of what are we going to do, right? The artists are really important right here because you all have the way to persuade people that it's very difficult for an elected public official to do. You can move that heart space. And if you are inclined to write a poem, make a movie, paint a picture, write a song, we need you to do that. It is impossible for me to understand the 60s without thinking about Marvin Gaye, right? In so many it's impossible for me to understand the civil rights movement without those songs. Ain't gonna let nobody, right? And so we need the artists to step up. We need the artist activists to help inspire people to action. And remember, writers are artists too. And so some of you all who might be able to, with absolute due regard to people's privacy, write about their story. The right wing has made some women embarrassed that they got an abortion. Well, the truth is, your circumstance might be the same as somebody else's and might free them, to talk about, the situation. I mean, a friend of mine was telling me about an ectopic pregnancy the other day. She said, look, some people want to condemn me because I had a late, quote unquote, late term abortion. We painted the room. We bought all the stuff for the baby. I was so excited. The doctor told me that I wasn't going to survive if we didn't have this abortion. I was brokenhearted. Now, who in the hell is some politician going to come tell this woman what she's supposed to do? And yet that's the right they arrogate unto themselves. So there is an important artistic moment to be met here. And I hope we don't miss it.
Thank you for that. It's really been my honor and my privilege to serve with these attorney generals and others who are not present. We've sued polluters together, predatory landlords, predatory lenders, price gougers. We've sued big tech. We've sued gun manufacturers. We've delivered billions of dollars for individuals who were part of the opioid scourge. And now it's our time, and we have stood up to defend the right to choose, and also the right to love, the right to marry, the right to organize, the right to vote. And it's now up to all of us. If you look all throughout history, we're in a period where we really need to rise up and stand up together as a coalition of individuals who care about one another, who recognize that we're all part of one human family. From the civil rights era, suffragettes to getting the LGBTQ community, we were all together. And so I'm leaning in on young people, and particularly people who are part of the whole social media community, to lean into and to talk about the dangers that overturning Roe versus Wade represents to all of us. The 14th Amendment is clear that it will not deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of its law. And people have cited Clarence Thomas, but I'm going to cite Justice Harry Blackmun, who wrote the majority in Roe versus Wade, who basically said the right to privacy is implicit in the 14th Amendment, and that although we all have to balance the interest, it's really critically important that a woman's right to an abortion and the right to privacy is protected under the 14th Amendment. Let us remember that as we march silently into the polling sites and vote. Vote for our democracy, vote for our country, vote for privacy, and vote for a woman to have control over her future, her destiny, and full autonomy. Thank you so much, Netroots, and thank you for allowing me to serve on this panel.
Does anybody have just one quick question? Because I know we're a little bit over. Yeah. What's your question?
A.G. Ellison, you mentioned like the artist stepping up, and then A.G. James, you mentioned like partnering with the Chamber of Commerce.
Yeah.
Can you all also list like other groups who need to step up, like and groups that you would normally think of? Like I'm an attorney, or like lawyers need to step up. Like what are some other groups that have really been active on this issue and have like really moved the ball on this issue?
I'm just going to repeat the question real quick for folks watching online. So A.G. Ellison mentioned some groups like the artists who could be stepping up. And the question is, what other groups could be stepping up during this time?
I'll be quick because I'd love to hear the ideas of my colleagues, but I would tell you that, and A.G. James did mention the business community, but I would tell you that the healthcare community, the doctors, nurses in particular, doulas, and guess what? There's way more than that. What do you think, Wayne?
I would add to that universities and academia, and stop hiding behind, all fair and balanced. What's right is right, and what's wrong is wrong, and you need to step up.
I'll just add, double click on providers, philanthropy. And they are stepping up, but it's a time, just as corporate responsibility is needed, so is philanthropy. And then anyone with a platform, whether it be on social media. I love it when people use their celebrity for good. Athletes, movie stars. This is important to all of us. And they have a following, and they have people that care about what they say, and they could use that as a force for good, so they should.
I'm going to end as I begun, the business community, chambers of commerce. You could not have a functioning economy without a functioning democracy. And right now, our democracy is being threatened by forces who would turn back the clock of progress on all of the issues that I mentioned: the right to choose, the right to love, the right to organize, and the right to vote.
Thank you. Please, one more round of applause for our attorneys general. I'm sorry we cut it short. Oh, thank you.